Welcome to Bloomerang Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today, where we are talking about strategies for end of year giving. Joining us today is the second half of Die Squared, my partner in crime, Di Cox, who is our resident database consultant at Bloomerang and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to today's class, to Bloomerang. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Diana. I'm really excited to talk about this. Year-end giving can be really intimidating. It can also be really overwhelming with everything else going on right at the end of the year. So hopefully today we can give you guys some ideas now so that you can really prep out, really make sure your staff is prepared. Thinking outside the box. For those of you who have listened to my academy classes, you know I'm all about the creativity and really working to steward your donors and connect with them in different and new ways every time you reach out. So let me get my screen shared and we will dive in. Our agenda today. First of all, we're going to need to determine your end of year fundraising goals. So knowing what you've raised and how much you still need to raise is going to be really important and can really do a lot in determining strategy. We will also talk about year-end mailing appeals and follow-ups, and also year-end email appeals and follow-ups. Some people treat that the same, some people do different strategies, so we'll kind of talk through some different ways to handle that. We'll talk about matching gift asks. I think this is something that is overlooked at end of year quite a bit and can bring in quite a lot of money really close to the end of the year without a lot of work. So we'll build out a report for that and we'll talk through that strategy. We're also going to talk about the biggest giving days of the year. So Giving Tuesday and surprisingly enough, December 30th and December 31st. We'll talk about holiday messaging and stewardship. We'll have the Q&A and the resources, of course, and we also will jump into Bloomerang. We'll talk a little bit in the database about setting up your database for success and doing that now instead of when gifts start coming in. And we'll also build out a couple of reports together. So to get started here, determining your year-end fundraising goals. The easiest way to do this is to figure out what's left of your annual campaign goal. So frankly, that's just saying whatever the goal was at the beginning of the year minus the money that you have brought in. If you are using Bloomerang, you can absolutely use that campaign progress bar if you set that up for your annual campaign this year. I will note, and we'll go into this more when we jump into the database, that campaign progress bar is going to show you what is raised. So in Bloomerang, some definitions here. Raised is pledges plus donations that are not pledge payments. So if somebody pledged $100,000, that's what's showing up, not the $10,000 that they've already given as a pledge payment. So it's that big pledge plus whatever actual donations have come in. Revenue is money that has come in. So that is not looking at pledges, it's looking at payments. So recurring gift payments, pledge payments, and then your actual donations that have come in. So again, we'll take a look at that and I will show you how you can pull that out into reports to give you a better idea of where you are and make sure that you are really aiming for that goal that you have left of that year or of your annual budget. You can also use your development plan, keyword there. If you don't have one built, we have classes on that. We also have classes coming up for that. But you can use your development plan if you built one out to know how many appeals are left in the year and what has been planned for already. And so part of that will being aware of when your due dates are, who's going to be in charge of that, who's making the changes on your website, what expectations you have for staffing. So, making sure that your staff is staggered for being off at the end of the year and also that everyone's getting time with their families at the end of the year. And then making sure that everybody, so your staff, potentially volunteers, definitely your board, knows what your stewardship plan is for the end of the year. So making sure that you guys have a plan out for who is thanking who and who all will be participating in that stewardship is going to be really important and can really set the tone for going into the last couple of months here as we ramp up towards January. I've said it before, I'll say it again, stewardship should never be an afterthought. So that should definitely be part of your planning when you are building out what all your organization is going to be doing at the end of the year. And you should have a solid plan in place. If you've never had a stewardship plan, this is a great year to start. It's never too late to start it, but you should definitely start it sooner rather than later. And if you guys already have a stewardship plan in place, please share it in the chat. New endeavors can be really overwhelming, especially for our smaller shops. So if you guys have a great plan in place already for your stewardship, let people know, and then they can adapt that for themselves. Going into your mailing and appeals. So with mailings, you need to remember that this is your last big ask of the year. So again, it may be a series of last big asks. Maybe some people are receiving all or only some of your appeals going towards end of year, depending on how you're setting that up. But you need to make sure that the people who are receiving your mail appeals are frankly worth the money to send the postage, the paper, pay for a mail house if you're doing that, all of that time and energy and resources that go into it. So I've given some examples here of who should be in line for your paper receipts. So the first one is LIBUNT donors. LIBUNT stands for last year, but unfortunately not this year. So those would be donors who gave last year, but they haven't given this year. They're low-hanging fruit. They've given, they're knowledgeable about your organization, and frankly, it's pretty top of mind. You can then also set parameters. This will be different for every organization. So given in the last X number of years, some people say 3 years, some people say 5 years. It kind of depends on the size of your database, the size of your organization, and what your donor makeup looks like. Also, people who have given certain dollar amounts can be really great segments for receiving mail appeals. So if you are going to be asking your major donors to make another gift, you'll need to set out what a major donor is and then how much additional you're going to ask. Maybe you're going to ask the people that are really close to being cumulatively what you consider to be a major donor. Maybe it's everyone who's given over X amount of dollars already this year, whether it's a major donor or not, but you've decided it's worth the postage, the mail house, the paper, the ink, everything else that goes into it. For your mails, you want to make sure that there's a remittance envelope in there so that it's easy for them to fill out and mail back in their check or cash or credit card information. I also recommend adding a link to your website. There will be people who would rather just sit down and give a gift to your donate page. So make sure that they have that, and then they don't have to really search around your website to get there. And then your messaging in this appeal, for any year-end appeal, you need to say something that you haven't already said. So again, we're back to this creativity idea that I like. Try a new approach. So if you've done really emotional all year, maybe do something really hopeful and joyful. If you've done the hopeful and joyful, maybe talk about the goals you haven't met yet this year and get them excited about helping you meet those goals. Again, this is going to look different for every organization depending on how you communicate with your donors and frankly, what works with your donors. So that's kind of what we're looking at for that appeal there. You need to decide who's getting your paper mailings, and then you need to decide what you're going to say as part of that. With your follow-ups, I recommend keeping follow-ups really short and simple, especially if you're doing a really nice appeal letter. Maybe consider a postcard. It's less money than sending another big letter, or maybe include a whole bunch of pictures, this time with minimal amounts of text. They've already received your big long letter. What they just need is a reminder to give. So again, make sure your URL is in there and be really consistent with the messaging. So whatever you did with your main letter, just piggyback off of that for your follow-up. And I get asked this question a lot. Handwritten or printed is fine for a follow-up. You are just asking the people who haven't given yet to give. So some people find that doing a handwritten follow-up is more effective than doing another printed card of some sort. But again, you can kind of play with that. You can try half and half handwritten if you have the staffing to do that. You can even, some people will have their board members call and follow up with their major donors, high level staff follow up through phone calls. So there are a bunch of different options on how you do your follow up, but make sure you're doing one at end of year. So I did put in here your reports needed. So for the appeal, it's anyone you've decided to include. And then the follow-up is going to be that list minus anyone who's given. We can kind of build that out in Razor's Edge Bloomerang when we jump into that. You can also, for the record, I know not everyone listening in is a Bloomerang customer. You can do the same thing in Razor's Edge. You can do the same thing in your other databases. And frankly, you can use Excel to do this as well. So if you're not using a database, that's absolutely fine. So your email appeals, you're going to see this is working pretty much exactly like your mailing list. But what I recommend is if you have long past donors that you would like to reach out to, but they're not giving, consider an email if you have their email. Also, for everybody that you would normally send a paper mail to that you don't have their address, make sure that they're getting an email. So your audience is going to be the same parameters that you've picked for your paper appeal if they don't have an address. And then you're also going to send to people who are in your SciBunt report. So LIBunt was last year, but unfortunately not this year. SciBunt is some year, but unfortunately not this year. So you can go in and you can exclude your LIBunt report from your SciBunt report. I will show you guys how to do that in Bloomerang. And then you have that list of people who've given in past years, but they didn't give last year. They're not low-hanging fruit. They're kind of those long shots. And this can save money at your end of year time. Instead of spending money to reach out to those long shots, you're still messaging to them, but hopefully they'll respond via email and you'll still pull in some money, again, without spending any. So make sure, though, that your messaging is identical to your paper appeal. So you're really writing one appeal letter, you're just sending it in two different ways. Your follow-up, again, you can play with this and do it a couple of different ways. Make sure that it's short again. Some people will send an email, and then if they have addresses, they'll follow up with a postcard or with a letter. Absolutely fine. Most people will just send a second email on top of it or make some phone calls if you have the numbers. And then make sure that you're linking straight to your giving page in that follow-up as well. And of course, you want that follow-up email to be the same as your follow-up letters, postcards, phone calls, however you're handling that. So make sure that your messaging is consistent throughout. And then the reports needed. So anyone you've decided to include, and then of course the follow-up is that same list minus anyone who's already given to the year-end appeal that you're talking about. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a formula here for some easy solicitation. This is really just the outline, bare bones. Make it your own, of course. But the first thing that you should really be doing is establishing or reestablishing your donor's relationship to the organization. So make sure they remember why they're giving, what they're doing, how they matter as a part of your organization. You also do need to remind them of your mission. Missions are really important because people really get a lot of impact out of that, and they can really start to understand what their money is doing and where it's going. Talking about programming is great, but making sure they understand at the end of the day what your goals are is really what's going to drive them to decide, yes, this goal is important. Yes, what they're trying to achieve is important, and they need to be a part of that. And then gift impact statements can be really helpful, especially at the end of the year, so that they understand what certain amounts of money can do for your organization. This is harder for some organizations than it is others, but you can phrase it in a way, if you say $5 will buy, meals for 12 shelter puppies, you're not saying that their money is going to buy meals for those 12 puppies. What you're saying is that's the kind of impact it can have. So be careful in your wording that your impact statements are not really limiting their gift and making those funds restricted. It's just what kinds of things you guys do with different levels of money and the kind of impact it can have. Saying give us money is great. Saying $25 is going to really protect children. Those are really different statements, and saying what it's going to do and how it's going to impact these children's lives, these animals' lives, your students' lives, whatever kind of nonprofit you have, just relate it back. And then finally, ask them for their support. One thing that I would avoid is using the line, "We couldn't do this without you," because unless this is your first year as an organization, you've been potentially doing it without them, especially if they're on a LIBUN or a SIBUN report. So that line can be a little bit trite, and it seems a little disingenuous to a lot of people. So make sure that you are just being direct and asking them for their support. Ask them to support your mission. Ask them to help you achieve your goals. Ask them to really make sure that their dollars have real impact at the end of this year. And that's that easy formula. Like I said throughout here, tell a story. Make it really interesting, make them want to read that next paragraph. That's really how you are going to ensure that your donors are really bought in and they want to give. So moving on to matching gifts. So matching gifts simply are monies that an organization gives, and that adds to the initial donation that the employee makes. So basically it can improve the impact of the donor's dollars. So you can go ahead and soft credit these gifts back to the individuals to make sure that they're getting credit for having brought in that money, but they're not getting tax credit for that money. You want to make sure that you're separating out how that's labeled so that your donors are not, if they gave $100 and then their employer matched that $100, they're not getting a tax receipt for $200. They're getting a tax receipt for $100. But they're getting acknowledged for having brought in $200. So soft credits is the best way to handle that in Bloomerang. That's the best way to handle it in most softwares that you might use. And the nice thing is that you can reference making a matching gift in your year-end appeals. You can absolutely talk about that. And then one of the reports that we'll build out together will be a nice little mailer that you can do for anyone who has already told you who they work for and ask for those matching gifts. So we'll build that out together, and I'll explain a little further how to use that. And as I already mentioned, this brings in more money with really minimal effort. So you're not doing the legwork to get that money from the organizations, your donors are, but making sure that they really feel that mission and are really passionate about the work that you're doing. If their employers will match gifts, making sure that they're really bought into what you're doing will ensure that they're asking their employers to come back around and match the gifts to you so that their impact is greater. All right, so talking about some database setup. So potentially you'll need more than one appeal. So I've given some examples here. So we've got our year-end appeal, Giving Tuesday appeal, a New Year's Day appeal, or New Year's Eve appeal potentially, and then your matching gifts appeal. One note for campaigns versus appeals. So your campaigns are overarching efforts. So in Bloomerang, we recommend making campaigns for things like, your overall dollar goals for the year, large events, capital. So those are the three main types of campaigns that you're going to have. Appeals are asks, efforts, or the way that money is coming in. So asking for a Giving Tuesday gift for most organizations is going to be an appeal. Unless you are doing a multifaceted Giving Tuesday approach with multiple, layers of asks and a whole bunch of information on your website, letting your donors know about your progress and all of that and trying to get organization matches. If you're doing that, that's a campaign. If you are doing a simple Giving Tuesday appeal, that should be under appeal. Same thing with matching gifts, same things with your end of year letter. So kind of talking magnitude here, set most of these as appeals. If you are doing something larger, a great argument could be made for creating a campaign. But in most cases, you're going to be setting up all of your end of year asking as appeals. So now we are going to hop over into the database. So let me pull that up. All right, so here in Bloomerang, again, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up appeals. So my organization here, we are going to do matching gifts. We're going to do an end of year appeal, Giving Tuesday, and then we're going to do a New Year's Eve, not a New Year's Day appeal. We'll do our follow-up on New Year's Day, but we're going to count it as the same appeal. So I'm going to come down to the settings cog here, and I will go to appeals. And you can see everything that I have active right now. As you can see, there is some cleanup I need to do. These future dated appeals really should be hidden until we're ready to use them. But that's okay. I've noted that, and I'll be able to go back and do my database cleanup. And so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to create my new appeals. So I'm going to do my 2021 end of year appeal. I'm going to do a 2021 New Year's Eve appeal. And I am going to do a matching gifts appeal. And I'm not putting a year on this one because my pretend organization, we ask for matching gifts year round, and we have a couple of pretend constituents who already give us matching gifts. So this is for any time it comes in. We're just going to do a specific push at the end of the year for it, but we can just reuse this appeal. So in talking about some of the reports, like I mentioned, there's a difference between raised and revenue. And you can see on my campaign progress bar, we have a raised amount. So this is not talking about the actual dollar amount that has come in. This is all of the dollars that have come in minus pledge payments, but it's also plus the actual pledge amount. And that is the same on any of them that we're looking at. This is the raised amount. We have our goal amount. So if I wanted to see what has actually come in, when I go into a new transaction report, I can add some extra columns. I can also add some extra helpful columns in a constituent report, but we're going to start with transaction. So this is going to pull up all of the transactions in my database since I have no filters here. But this first column that we're seeing, which is the default column, is the amount column. Amount is going to be any sort of type of gift that has come in. And this can be really helpful with reconciliation reports, monthly with your financial person or program that you're using. And you can see, $100,000 for a pledge. This is also going to show your pledge payments, donations, soft credits, anything that has come in. And this is going to tell you the full amount of everything that's in your database. This, again, is really helpful for reconciliation, for seeing what's coming over the month, to get an idea of what you can expect to come in the future. But it's not really helpful for planning out what you need to bring in for your end of year. So we can come over to add column. And if we type in raised, we can see the raised amount. So this again is going to give us our pledges plus our actual money that's come in minus pledge payments. And we can also put in the revenue amount. And the revenue amount is going to be the actual cash that's in the door. So I'm going to add these columns. I'm also going to move these columns over so that we can see them side by side. So I'm going to move raised amount over. And then I'm also going to move my revenue amount over. And so this is really going to give you an idea of the difference in these three numbers. So we can see the amount, which is everything. We can see that raised amount. You can see that there's a difference, but then revenue is how much has actually come in the door. So for your end of year, you might be an organization that as long as the pledge is made, you guys are considering that as, meeting your goal for the year, and that's fine. So the raised amount might be what you need to look at. With that said, you might be an organization that says, hey, a pledge is a promise of money, but that money hasn't come in and we need to raise this amount to actually pay our bills this year. So what we need to raise is that revenue amount, and then that raised amount will go to, next year's revenue as those payments start to come in. So really think about how your organization defines having met your goals, and then use the raised or revenue accordingly. And then again, this amount here is just helpful to see what everything is that has come in this door, what's in your database. And then you can also use some filters up here. So we can do the date, and we can say this year or this fiscal year, depending on what you're on. So we're going to say this year. So these are really big differences, as you can see. We have a really large raised amount, but our revenue amount is pretty small. So are we actually going to be able to pay our bills with what's in our bank right now? Or do we need to raise a little bit more as this money trickles in? So that's how we look at the difference between amount, raised, revenue. Next, we're going to look at those LIBUNT and SIBUNT reports. So in Bloomerang, we have templated reports that are already built out for you, which can be really helpful when you're just trying to get a snapshot of who you're looking at, or if you want to use a LIBUNT or SIBUNT report to be able to reach out to your donors. So when we click in the LIBUNT report, we can take a look at these filters. So you can see a revenue amount of at least a penny, and the date is last fiscal year. You can come in and make changes to this. So if you want it to be during last year and not last fiscal year, you can make that change. If you want it to be between specific date ranges, you can. We're going to leave this report as is, though. And then you can see that we are excluding anybody from this fiscal year. So we want to see people who gave last year but have not given this year yet. And that's going to give us our list. We can see here that we have their latest transaction amount here. And then we can see their last fiscal year total. This is already built out for us. And we can see if there have been any interactions this fiscal year. So that can be really helpful to see if they've received a mailing yet, if they've received a phone call, and determine the amount of contact that they've had with your organization. We can then take this report and save it as LIBUNT report. And this is now going to appear in my report list. And so it's usable for things like mailing lists. There it is. You can see I've got a LIBUNT. I also have a LIBUNT report. These reports are dynamic, so they will adjust along with everything else going on in your database. And then we can see the same for SIBUNT. So I'm going to go back to start from a template, and we see the SIBUNT report here. So again, SIBUNT is, they gave some year, but unfortunately not this year. So again, excluded is going to be this year, and included is just that they have given a revenue amount of at least a penny. So another change, if you have people who have outstanding pledges, you may want to exclude anyone who has an outstanding pledge. You may also want to exclude anybody who has a recurring gift. So again, you can take this template and you can build it out to work for your organization, however you need to do it. We again have this latest transaction amount here, and we have their lifetime revenue listed out, plus their interactions this fiscal year. So I'm going to save this report as well as Sybont report. So one other trick that you can do in Bloomerang is embed reports within reports. So if we want to send an email appeal to everybody who is in the Sybont report, but we want to exclude everybody from the Libont report, we absolutely could go in and build out all of those filters. But something else we could do is take our Sybont report as is, and so we would be excluding anyone whose date is this fiscal year. We can come in and do or, and we can look for a report. And then we can select our Libont reports. And this is going to get rid of everybody who is in that report. So as you can see in my very small database here, this gives us 4 names. But that's a really important thing to see. We can also then add a column for email just to see how many of these people have an email address. In my fake database, none of them do. So I would probably need to either send a paper letter or make a phone call. But if they all have letters, we can then save this report as, Sybont report minus Libont. So I can save this. And then I can come into my email and I can use this as an embedded filter. So I can say anybody that is in a report. This is set for transaction report. It's a bad example, but I can do this, constituent, and then come in and say report. And then I can come in and say Sybont minus Libont report, and that's going to give me my 4 people. None of them have email addresses, totally fine. Since this one is a transaction one, it's going to break out every single transaction they gave. You'll want to use a constituent report, but the process is the same. So you'll want to go in and you're going to want to find that report, and you're going to use that report as your filter for who you're emailing to, who you're sending letters to. I know we went through that a little bit fast. If you need help embedding reports, our support team can absolutely walk you through that. Once you get the hang of how to do it, it's really simple, and it can come in really, really handy when you're trying to, you've got this great list, but you really want to exclude these certain people, and you already have that in another report. Instead of trying to rebuild it out, just say exclude the people from this report, and you're done with it. So that is how you can start to use reports. You can do the same thing with include. If you have different segmentations out and you want to include your Libont group and you want to include, your major donors, and you want to include a third group, you can include your report Libont, you can include your report major donors, you can include your report whoever it is, and it will pull out that group of people. So lastly, we are going to look at a way to build out a report for those matching donors. So again, we're asking people in our database who have in some capacity shared with us who their employer is. So they either added it to a form or they told somebody, maybe they've already matched gifts, so you guys know who that is. So we can do this a couple of different ways. I'm again going to show you how to use it with a template. That way we can modify the template, and I can show you what that template looks like after we've modified it. So I'm going to come into new and start from a template. And this time we're going to look at the employer relationships template. So this is looking specifically at anybody who has an employee-employer relationship. And I want anyone who has given a gift this calendar year. So specifically in this report, we're looking at this calendar year because we're going to be asking people to match that before the end of year. So I'm going to say has transactions. has any specific transactions, and I'm going to include the date is during this year. And most companies will only match revenue. There are a few exceptions out there, but mostly what you're going to be looking for is revenue amount. So you can do a couple of different things. You can add revenue here. We can also add it in columns down here. For the purpose of my report and my small database, we're just going to do date here. And then we're going to come to or. So the difference between and or, and means they must hit both of these criteria. So this next line down is going to be people who have to hit two different criteria. But instead of specific relationships, we're going to use the employer, which is embedded in the constituent profile and can be really helpful when it's filled out. So they either have to have a relationship or they have to have employer filled out. Some of them might have both. We'll be able to see that, but they have to hit at least one of these criteria. And they need to have given a gift this year. So regardless of which one they have, they need to have a gift. So again, the date is going to be this year. So these are the two criteria that we're going to use for this report. If you have relationships like business and owner, you can add another relationship as the or for an owner of a business and their company. If you have done a batch screen, you might have companies that have a business relationship as part of their donor search batch screen. So you can use those generosity details and have that as your next or. Just make sure you are including that they have a gift every time. So you can see here that we have 6 constituents. This employer relationship is what is being grouped right now. I want to remove this grouping. So we have the name of all of these individuals here. Some of them have street. We have all of this contact information. So I'm going to get rid of the contact information for right now. This is probably going to be information that you guys need, but I just want to show you the other helpful columns here without doing a bunch of scrolling. So I'm going to add a column for employer. And I'm going to move this over. So you can see that right now, none of these organizations have an employer relationship. They all have an employer listed. Absolutely fine. I am also going to add a column for has transactions. And I want to see the sum of the revenue amount. And I want it to be for this year. So we're going to come down and do date is during this year. So now I can reach out to all of these people and say, hi, so far this year, you've given us $125. We're really hoping that the guild will match your gift. Here's our EIN number. Please reach out and, request that they double your impact. So you can phrase this in a couple of different ways, but you can see here, some of these people, they've given a $0 amount. Again, for my information, we just set a date up here. So maybe they gave a gift in kind. Again, some organizations may be willing to match that. Most won't. So if you start to see a lot of $0 amounts, make sure that you're adding in this filter here and revenue amount is at least a penny. So there are ways to start to break that out a little bit more. You might also see some names that are organizations. I don't happen to have any of those, but if that's the case, come up and exclude type organization because we just want to reach out to our individuals. It might also be helpful to come up and look at their status. Because it's going to be really embarrassing to reach out to someone who has passed away this year and ask them to get their company to match a gift. So that might be something else. You can see for me, that took away one person from my list. So work with those exclusion filters to make sure that your list is tight and is giving you a list of individuals that we know are alive, that we know work for a company, and then give them that total in your EIN number and ask for the match. As I stated before, you absolutely can reference a match in your end of year letters, which is helpful. But a lot of people read that and sort of pass it up. I really recommend building out this report specifically because exactly one of the nonprofits that I give to gives me an email with my cumulative total for the year and their EIN number, and they get 100% of my match. And the reason for that is I am not trying to go back through paper receipts and do a bunch of math to get all of those totals. I'm not trying to go through my email receipts. I'm just given my cumulative total and I've got their EIN number. So it's really fast for me. It's really easy. And reaching out to a small list of people who meet this criteria for you guys is small potatoes in the world of asks. And some organizations will match up to a certain dollar amount. Some will make the exact same match as to what the gift was. So you could potentially be bringing in quite a lot of money for not a lot of effort, and really making your donors feel good about increasing that impact that they're having to the organization. All right, let me click back over into the PowerPoint. All right. So let's talk about some of the biggest donation days of the year. So if you're not really sure when you should be asking, this is a good template. If you've never done your event giving asks before, December 30th and December 31st, New Year's Eve, a lot of people will forget as the holiday season is going on that they need to get their year-end giving in. And for tax purposes, a lot of people really do feel the need to make charitable gifts at the end of the year. So really remind people that this is the last giving day of the year if they want it to count towards a tax deduction. And then if you haven't tried something like a peer-to-peer challenge or texting, and that's something you kind of wanted to do or you think might be helpful, or even if you've done it successfully before, this can be a really good time to do it. Do it before people start drinking. And then frankly, doing it towards the end of the night can't hurt either, because people will get really excited to give and want to really make sure they're meeting challenges and anything else you've lined up for the last 2 giving days of the year. So really get creative with it. And this is a good time to think outside of the box, because really it's the last thing that's going to count for your calendar year. So I also put a chart here of the number of gifts. This is actually from our sister product, Kindful, what brought in their average single gift amounts and their total revenue on these days across their database. So I thought these numbers were really fascinating and wanted to share this with you guys. So these are huge giving days, and you can see that those revenue amounts are insane. So please don't pass this by and think that this isn't something you can do or handle, or that it's not worth it, because it absolutely is. Again, just work to make sure that you guys are standing out from the crowd in the very crowded holiday season of giving. So next up, I wanted to talk about some holiday messaging and also stewardship. So on the left here, I've got some ideas. Updating your website can be really helpful. There are going to be people who are kind of trolling websites just to see what people are doing. So a really sweet holiday message on your landing page can be great. It gets people excited and feeling a little festive. I really like the idea of updating employee bios or somewhere else on your page where you can do something fun. It can be kitschy. This is the time of year for kitsch, so be totally okay with that. add board messages. People oftentimes don't get a lot of board contact unless they are your biggest donors. And so spreading the love out around to everybody and having some really sweet messages or fun messages from your board can be a great way to humanize them to the segment of your database that doesn't really get a lot of face time with them. And then it's also a great time to remind them of anything that you have coming up. So you can do that in really fun and creative ways, on top of also sending holiday cards. So this is not going to be possible for every organization, and that's totally okay. But you can spread out who's sending them. It does not have to be like your one major gifts officer who's sitting there already overwhelmed at the end of the year. Have your board send it. Have volunteers send a thank you card or a letter that's handwritten, to your lowest level donors. It can be from anybody. Just make sure that you're saying happy holidays in some capacity. And then again, stewardship ideas over on the right. You guys are going to have awesome ideas on stewardship as well. So make sure you're adding that to the chat and checking the chat. But make sure that you are making your thank you calls. You should absolutely be doing that at end of year. Fund holiday videos, either on your website or on, in emails, can be a lot of fun. You could even have something where your staff is sharing New Year's resolutions, or some of your consumers, if it's appropriate for them to be out in front of people, share what they want to do in this new year. And then I love surprising and delighting. So you can host a socially distanced happy hour or some other sort of Zoom event. If it makes sense to bring people on site where you are in some capacity, go ahead and do something like that. Just set up something fun. It's not a donor event. You're not asking them for money. You're just doing something fun. You can also do something with random acts of kindness, different ways to pay it forward. You can send out ideas to your donors on different things that they could do, where again, you're not asking for money, you're just getting them involved. So please, please, please share your ideas on what you guys do, things that have worked really well, things that have been really fun or funny, or that your staff loves, because this season should be fun. Like, yes, you need to finish up your goals, but keeping it light is what's going to keep your staff really motivated, what's going to get them through the hardest days of it, and frankly, what's going to make your donors really excited to keep giving to you. So make things fun, have your plan in place. One other note for anybody who's never really done much with end of year giving, I'm going to tell a bit of a personal story here. I worked for a fraternity foundation for a while, and when I was asking what we needed to, start ramping up for end of year, they said, "Oh, we don't do end of year." And I was a little bit shocked and had asked why. And they said, and this is their words, not mine, the only thing people care about at end of year are keeping animals warm and keeping people fed. And to be fair, there's a lot of that, and it's kind of an already built-in really good reason to give to local animal shelters, to, give to your food pantries, all of that. But something that I recommended after thinking about it for a while is reaching out to alumni spouses and the parents of active students, active fraternity brothers. And I had asked if we had done that before, and the answer was no. People like giving, and a lot of different religions this time of year, part of what this season means and what their religious holidays mean is giving back. So I suggested we do an email push. It wouldn't cost us anything, specifically, again, to the spouses and the parents of the active brothers. And we actually had a really great response. A lot of people ended up giving a gift in honor of their loved one as part of their holiday present. So when I say think out the box and get creative, there's a lot that you can do, and it makes people happy to be able to give a gift that's actually giving back. So don't limit yourself to, well, our organization isn't important this time of year, or we don't have a good ask we can make, because you do. Every single organization out there does. So just find that niche and then go for that. And if that's what you do for end of year, you don't do a big push, you do something smaller and really specific, that's okay. Again, it's getting people to give, getting people to remind you of what's important, and getting them in the giving holiday awesome spirit. So really think about what makes you guys happy, the kind of gifts that you get that make you happy, and then bring that back around and ask your donors for that. Because if it's giving you warm fuzzies, it's going to give them warm fuzzies too. So just kind of remember that during your giving. And then I also recommend, I know we've been talking about year end, but start your new year off right. Send a newsletter if you've never done a New Year's letter. Again, really great time for it. Encourage your donors to start the year off right with a gift. Again, we need to be stewarding. So say thank you for everything they did and helped you achieve in the previous year. So make sure that you're thanking the people, even if they haven't given this year, for listening, for being a part of your mailing list, for not, having opted out of things. Make sure you're saying thank you. Some people, especially coming off of COVID right now, aren't in a place where they can give. But reminding them of the good work you're doing and reminding them of how awesome you guys are will make sure that you're top of mind when they get to a place where they can give in the future.
Thank you so much, Ty. That was a lot of great information as always. I also wanted to share that in terms of the resources too, a lot of you have been watching the chat and a lot of you have also shared some resources. So we'll include that when we send out the slides. We love it when everyone shares resources as well. So we want to make sure to include that for everyone too. We have time for a couple of questions. Let me pull up my notes here. A lot of people are feeling overwhelmed about not having a stewardship plan. Mm-hmm. Can we speak to that a little bit? How can they go about creating one? How is a stewardship plan different from a cultivation plan or a development plan?
Great questions. I feel like maybe there's a class in my future on this question. But in short, so I am kind of on a one-woman mission to separate the definition of cultivation and stewardship. So cultivation is where you are building a relationship. So think of it like dating. And then stewardship is the relationship is already set, but you need to make sure that it continues to be a great relationship. So think of that like dating your spouse. I know that's kind of a weird way to look at it, but there's no commitment with cultivation. You're trying to get to that point of commitment. With stewardship, there's already a commitment. So stewardship can be looked at a couple of different ways. How you steward a first-time donor is going to be very different than how you steward a major donor, and how you steward your annual donors. So people who aren't giving major gifts, but they're giving, potentially might be different. End of year, it might be exactly the same. Again, I gave a bunch of ideas. I know that a bunch of people were giving ideas. So maybe if you don't have a stewardship plan, you decide to do a really great video that you send to everybody who gave this year. And that's how you steward them at the end of the year. As far as building out a stewardship plan, Diana's grinning really big because this is a really big answer for a very small amount of time. But basically, it's building it out when somebody hits that major gift level. What do you do differently? How are you thanking them? How are you reaching out to them? What does that relationship mean? For those first-time donors, how are you welcoming them? How are you thanking them? How are you encouraging them to stick with your mission? And then with those annual fund donors, it's really how do you keep them giving? How do you keep that relationship going? How do you help them to feel like their impact matters? Even though it's not a huge dollar amount, it still matters and every penny helps. So it's working with those relationships where they're at and kind of where you want it to go potentially, and just making sure that you are reaching out to them in ways that you are not asking for donations. And it goes back to kind of surprising and delighting. It's just great ways to say thank you and make sure that that relationship is going well.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. A lot of it is really like building that relationship. And I love that, surprising and delighting. We have a quick question. Would you place End of Year and Giving Tuesday as their own campaign or under your general 2021 campaign?
Again, that really sort of depends on how you're handling Giving Tuesday. What I recommend to most people is, and again, there are exceptions, but most people, it's going to be appeals that are under your, annual campaign. So however much you need to raise for the year, that's what you're putting it under. Again, if your Giving Tuesday is elaborate, anything that's elaborate and not just an ask, elaborate is a good campaign solution. That's the best way to handle it. Multiple asks, multiple communications, multiple ways it could be coming in. Large events is a good analogy for that. If you need to be getting in sponsors and you're selling tickets and you're sending out RSVP cards and all of that, that kind of reaches that level of campaign. There's a lot going into it, a lot of different ways for that money to come in. That should be a campaign. Most Giving Tuesday, you're doing an ask and you're sending a follow-up. And so that's just going to be an appeal. And that's fine. Not everything needs to be a campaign.
Great. Last question for today. Is there a reason to avoid sending a donor a physical and email version of the appeal other than just to save money? Sarah says they typically send email and mail to the same list.
So you can do both. What I would maybe recommend is if you're sending both, do one as the initial and the other one is the follow-up. Because, and I know this is a weird thing, but it's a perception issue. Everyone knows they're not the only one getting that letter, but if they're getting it by email and they're getting it by mail, then I would think, ooh, did they not realize I was on their mailing list? Or, it's a perception thing. I know that I'm probably on both lists. I know everybody's getting it. But making sure that you're separating that out a little bit so that they feel special. And I know that can be a little bit exhausting to try to make everybody feel special all the time. But making them feel like, it's not a duplicate and it's an accident is going to make sure that they understand that your database, what you're doing is done with intention. And that, if they could reach you by email, why are you spending the money on the mail? Again, is another thing that can come up. For anyone who is more environmentally conscious, if you have my email, why are we wasting paper? Could be something else that's thought. So again, it's just kind of being intentional and making sure that your donors are aware that the actions you're making are intentional. So there's nothing technically wrong with it. But again, it could potentially pull away from your mission and impact and everything else you're trying to achieve and raise some other questions with your donors.
Wonderful point. Thanks, Di. I always try to be intentional and deliberate. Also, just if you all weren't aware, you can set preferred communication channel in Bloomerang, as well as communication restrictions. So for example, if you have someone who is more conscious about let's cut down on the paper, you could mark them in the database as email is their preferred channel, or don't mail, send an email instead, so you can track that better. Thank you everyone for your time today. Thank you, Di, for all of that great information and great insights. I know we have a couple of questions that weren't answered, so we'll make sure to follow up via email. But thank you everyone for joining us today and spending part of your day with us. We hope that you got some tips that you can employ in your year-end giving strategy. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you in another Academy class soon. Bye.
Bye.